Thorne Vale, Juniper Redd, Silas Mirth, Elowen Cross, and Niah Tamsen, 5 forgotten children from a shuttered group home, presumed lost to the cracks of the system. But what no one knew was that these children hadn't vanished. They had transformed. In the shadows of the Callum Creek forest, they created something dark, organized, and terrifying. By the time the first missing child poster went up, their twisted rituals were already in motion, silent, methodical, and recorded on tape. This is the story of how innocence became evil, and how the forest never gave them back. The town of Callum Creek sat quietly between dense woodlands and empty highways, the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name and front doors stayed unlocked. Life moved slowly here, surrounded by nature and comfort. That changed in the fall of 2018, when fear took root like a disease. It began with the disappearance of 6-year-old Toby Harwin. He was last seen riding his red bike along the edge of the woods behind his home. His mother called him in for dinner, and he never came. Police searched for days, using dogs, helicopters, and volunteers from all over the county. But there were no signs of struggle, no torn clothing, and no bike, just silence and trees. 3 weeks later, 9-year-old Lila Foster vanished under similar circumstances. She had been playing with her dog in the backyard. The dog returned. Lila didn't. Her shoes were found near a small path leading into the woods, neatly placed side by side. The town grew tense. Rumors spread. Some blamed a stranger. Others whispered about old stories of hauntings in the woods. No one wanted to believe what was happening, especially not the parents of young children who clutched them tighter each day. Then it happened again. 8-year-old Brandon Kell was walking home from school and never made it to his doorstep. His backpack was later discovered in a bush along the forest's edge, its zipper torn but nothing stolen. Panic gripped Callum Creek. For the first time in decades, the schools shut down for a week. Children were kept inside. Search parties combed every inch of the surrounding forest, but all they found were dead ends and crushed hopes. The sheriff issued a curfew. The mayor held press conferences filled with empty reassurances. Some families even moved away, unwilling to live in a town that felt cursed. But most stayed, helpless and terrified, trapped in a place where the woods had eyes. It wasn't until late November that something was finally found. A local hunter named Roy Ellerman was tracking deer when he stumbled upon a strange clearing deep within the trees. It wasn't marked on any map and couldn't be reached by trail. The space was surrounded by twisted branches forming a circle, and in the middle stood several wooden poles. Hanging from each pole were crude, handmade dolls, stitched from cloth and straw. They were small, child-sized, and disturbing in detail. Each wore a fragment of real clothing, a torn sleeve, a sock, a strip of backpack fabric. Roy recognized the red and white pattern from news reports. It was Toby Harwin's jacket. Shaking, Roy reported the sight to the police. Investigators cordoned off the area and examined everything. The scene had an eerie precision to it. No footprints were found, as if the wind had erased every trace. But one thing stood out, carved into a mossy rock at the base of the central pole. A single word, deeply etched: chorus. It meant nothing to the locals, but the way it was written, clean and deliberate, sent chills down every spine. It felt ritualistic, planned, not random. And most disturbing of all, it didn't feel like the work of an adult. Media swarmed Callum Creek. Reporters speculated about cults, lost children, even ghosts. But the police were quiet. Internally, they had begun to explore a theory no one wanted to speak aloud. It wasn't just that the children had been taken. It was who had taken them. Some investigators suspected that the ones responsible weren't much older than the victims, a thought too horrifying to fully embrace. As snowfall began to cover the forest, the dolls remained. swaying gently in the cold wind, watching over the trees. The town held its breath. No new children disappeared for weeks, but no answers came either. And the forest, as always, kept its secrets. The word chorus, etched into the stone, became an obsession for detectives assigned to the case. It felt symbolic, intentional, and out of place in a crime involving missing children. Investigators scoured local archives, searching for anything that connected the word to local history, religious sects, or urban legends. What they found instead was a disturbing trail that led back to a place long forgotten: St. Harmony's refuge. Once a private foster home located just a few miles outside Callum Creek, St. Harmony's had been shut down nearly a decade earlier, following multiple reports of child neglect, physical abuse, and staff misconduct. The building now stood abandoned, swallowed by vines and rot, the windows shattered and the rooms filled with mildew and silence. St. Harmony's had served as a last resort facility, taking in children who had been rejected from other foster homes due to psychological issues or violent behavior. Digging through what remained of the records, detectives unearthed names of past residents. Most had gone on to other facilities or been adopted, but 4 files stood out, marked with red, tabs and brief notes like high risk, unmanageable, and disappeared. These 4 children had vanished from St. Harmony's before its closure, and their disappearances had been quietly dismissed by claiming they had run away. The first was Thorne Vale, a boy with exceptional intelligence and a cold, mechanical way of thinking. Teachers had described him as detached and calculating. His favorite subjects were anatomy and old folklore. The second was Juniper Redd, a girl so quiet that some staff believed she was mute. She spent hours drawing in her journal, pages filled with eerie forests, eyes in the trees, and people with hollow faces. The third, Silas Mirth, had been found several times in the woods behind the home, digging shallow holes and burying the carcasses of animals. One report claimed he tried to revive a dead squirrel using wires and a car battery. And the fourth was Elowen Cross, a girl fascinated by symbols and death. Her room was discovered to contain bones, feathers, and odd sculptures made from hair and twigs. These 4 children had never been located, and their files abruptly ended, as though someone had wanted to erase them from existence. But what was more disturbing was the discovery of their group nickname, used among staff, the Choir. No one could remember who first gave them the name, but everyone at the facility referred to them that way. The group had isolated themselves from the other children, spending hours together in the woods, speaking in whispers, performing odd rituals, and carving markings into trees. One former caregiver recalled that the 4 used to hum in unison, creating a strange tune that echoed through the hallways at night. The connection between chorus carved in the forest and the choir of St. Harmony's was impossible to ignore. It suggested not only that the missing children from years ago had survived, but that they had returned, older, stronger, and more dangerous. Investigators attempted to track down anyone who might have seen these 4 individuals after the home closed. Most leads went nowhere. No recent records, no fingerprints, no sightings. It was as if they had gone underground, or perhaps never left the woods at all. What deepened the mystery further was a series of strange symbols discovered near the original clearing, carved into tree trunks and stones. Experts called in to analyze them said they weren't connected to any known language, but some bore a resemblance to runes, while others looked like music notations twisted into unnatural shapes. They theorized it could be a form of communication or a ritualistic code. Forensic experts combed through every artifact left at the St. Harmony's building. In the basement, they found crude murals hidden behind crumbling drywall. Murals depicting faceless children holding hands around a bonfire, while others knelt beneath trees that bled from their bark. One particularly disturbing painting showed 4 figures standing behind a 5th, who appeared much smaller and surrounded by shadows. The figure had no eyes. Authorities realized then that there might have been a 5th child in the group. Someone not listed in the files. Someone forgotten, or deliberately hidden. And with that realization came a chilling thought. If these children had turned into something dark in those woods, who had taught them? It was a cold morning in early December when construction crews, tasked with converting the old St. Harmony's building into a community center, stumbled upon something unexpected. Behind a false panel in the attic, buried beneath insulation, and debris, was a heavy wooden box sealed with rusty nails and twine. Inside the box were 27 dusty VHS tapes, unlabeled except for faint numbers written in black ink. The box also contained a small notebook with no writing inside, only blank yellowing pages stained with age. The tapes were sent to the Police Evidence Lab, where investigators began the slow process of reviewing them one by one. The footage was raw, silent, and chilling. The first few tapes showed what seemed to be harmless scenes: children playing near trees, sitting in a circle, or stacking stones. But as the recordings progressed, the tone began to shift. The children in the videos were always the same: Thorne, Juniper, Silas, and Elowen. They appeared younger than they would be now, perhaps 10 or 11. They were almost always filmed in the woods, far from any visible structures. The camcorder never wavered, as if held by someone with a steady hand, or no fear. In one of the earliest unsettling videos, the group stood around a small squirrel. It was alive but unmoving, bound to a stone with vines and string. The children began to hum in unison, the same soft melody, until Thorne lifted a small, sharp stone and brought it down. The video cut to black immediately after. There was no sound, no screaming, no reaction, just silence. As investigators continued reviewing the tapes, the violence escalated. A cat appeared in the next recording, then a raccoon, then a fox. Each animal was surrounded, restrained, and used in what appeared to be ritualistic killings. The camera angles were deliberate, positioned to fully capture the circle of children and the central act. Strange symbols were often drawn in dirt around the perimeter, and Juniper could sometimes be seen sketching them in a worn leather notebook, possibly the same one found in the attic. One particularly horrifying tape featured something different. It began with the children walking through the woods, holding hands. They led the camera to a small clearing, lit only by the fading evening light. In the center sat a child, alive but dazed, with a blank expression and a slack jaw. It was Toby Harwin, the first child who had gone missing from Callum Creek. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't speak. He simply sat there while the others stood around him, chanting. The footage ended just as Silas approached with a long piece of wire. That tape was labeled with the number 24. Tape 25 showed Lila Foster. Tape 26, Brandon Kell. In both, the children were similarly unresponsive, possibly drugged or traumatized. The environment was consistent: deep forest with markings on trees and makeshift masks covering the faces of the perpetrators. The final tape, number 27, was the most cryptic. It began in total darkness. Gradually, the camera adjusted, and the viewer could see the backs of the 4 teens standing before what appeared to be a shallow pit filled with stones and bones. One of them, possibly Elowen, held a small flame in her hand. The others began to hum again, the same chilling melody, slower this time. They circled the pit once, then stood still. The camera slowly panned upward, revealing a new symbol carved into a tree above them, an unfamiliar sigil resembling both an eye and a musical note. The video ended abruptly. The tapes provided undeniable proof. The missing children had not been kidnapped by a single adult predator, but rather by a group of teenagers, likely the same 4 who had vanished from St. Harmony's years ago. What disturbed investigators even more was the ritualistic structure of the crimes. These weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated, rehearsed, and filmed, almost as if the group wanted to preserve their work, to create a twisted record of their evolution. The woods around Callum Creek were declared a crime scene, and a massive search operation was launched. But the group had vanished again. There were no footprints, no DNA, no recent sightings. The only evidence of their presence remained in grainy footage, bone fragments, and that haunting, unforgettable melody that now echoed in the minds of everyone who had seen the tapes. The discovery of the tapes sent shockwaves beyond Callum Creek, drawing the attention of federal agencies and criminal psychologists across the country. Specialists who studied cult behavior, juvenile psychopathy, and ritualistic crime descended upon the small town, each trying to piece together how 4 abandoned children could evolve into something so sinister. The FBI formed a task force to track down Thorne, Juniper, Silas, and Elowen, now believed to be between 16 and 18 years old. Despite the extensive manhunt, there were no bank records, no hospital visits, and no social security activity. It was as if they had never returned to normal society. Some experts believed they hadn't. Back at the site of the doll clearing, cadaver dogs discovered something new: a hidden underground chamber. It was cleverly camouflaged with stones and leaves. When unearthed, the entrance revealed a narrow, dirt tunnel leading to a room no larger than a garden shed. Inside were piles of worn sleeping bags, empty food wrappers, drawings on the walls, and small animal bones arranged in spirals. But what stood out most was a large piece of wood nailed to one wall. Upon it were dozens of Polaroids, each marked with dates and initials. Most photos were of forest scenes or unidentifiable dark shapes, but a few clearly depicted the missing children, some alive, others limp and cold. The initials written beside the photos didn't match any known names in the case files, except for one that did: NT, the forgotten 5th member. While Thorne, Juniper, Silas, and Elowen were always mentioned in the records, some investigators had speculated the presence of a 5th child. These photos confirmed it. Further investigation revealed that NT stood for Niah Tamsen, a boy whose file had been misfiled during the final year of St. Harmony's. He had arrived late, weeks before the home shut down, and was listed as a temporary intake with no family or placement history. No one had followed up after the closure, and Niah had slipped through the cracks. Niah's presence in the photos raised a disturbing possibility. If he was part of the group, what had happened to him? One photo stood out. It showed Niah bound, at the wrists, seated before a ring of small stones, surrounded by the other 4. His face was blank, and his eyes had been scratched out in the photo with a knife or nail. Underneath, a caption was scrawled in red ink: "He chose silence." This one phrase ignited debate among the task force. Did Niah betray the group? Was he a victim or an escapee? Or worse, was he still out there, continuing what the others had started? A psychological profile of the group painted them not as mindless killers, but as a structured entity, with roles and purpose. Thorne, the intellectual leader; Juniper, the ritualist; Silas, the enforcer; Elowen, the symbolist; and Niah, possibly the conscience or the outsider. If he had turned against them, it could explain the ominous caption. Weeks passed with no progress. Then a new discovery pushed the case in an unexpected direction. A backpack was found abandoned near the edge of the Sullen Pines Trail, deep in the neighboring county. Inside was a single item, an audio cassette labeled "Choir Practice." A technician digitized the contents. The tape began with soft static, then slowly, the faint sound of humming, 4 distinct voices, melodic and eerie. The pitch rose gradually, until it became almost unbearable. Then came silence. After several seconds, a whisper, a voice barely audible but unmistakably human. "I remember everything they made me do." That one sentence reopened the possibility that Niah was alive and had broken away. But it also raised another fear. If he remembered everything, what had he become? Was he trying to warn the world? or reliving it. Psychologists warned that trauma at such a young age, especially within a manipulative and violent environment, could result in severe dissociative states or worse, mimicry of the same behaviors. Niah might have escaped the forest, but he may have never left it in his mind. The FBI issued a national alert for Niah Tamsen. His photo, the only one available from age 10, was broadcast on television and printed in newspapers, but no confirmed. Sightings came. Only one anonymous call reached the local tip line. A woman claimed she had seen a teenage boy near her farm late at night, humming an odd tune by the fence line. When she approached, he vanished into the dark trees. She swore. He had no shoes on, and his eyes were closed. Winter fell hard on Callum Creek. Snow blanketed the forest, muting its sounds and hiding its secrets. Search teams dwindled as the terrain became impassable, but the fear never faded. The community had changed. Parents no longer allowed their children to walk to school, dogs barked at unseen shadows near the tree line, and even seasoned officers avoided night patrols near the old St. Harmony's grounds. Though months had passed since the last piece of evidence surfaced, something in the air still felt unfinished, as if the story hadn't reached its final chapter. Then came the fire. On a bitter February night, a blaze erupted in the heart of the woods. Firefighters raced toward the glow, expecting a brush fire, but what they found left them speechless. A two-story cabin, built from mismatched wood and stone, stood deep in the forest, where no official structure had been documented. It was already collapsing into ash and flame by the time responders arrived. Charred animal bones, burned furniture, and strange wooden idols melted in the heat. What caught investigators' attention was what lay just outside, a large wooden cross leaning against a pine tree. Nailed to it was a single Polaroid, half burnt but still visible. It showed 5 children, dressed in torn white clothing, standing in a circle with their backs turned. The presence of 5 figures confirmed suspicions. Niah had indeed been a part of the group. Whether he had returned to the forest or never truly left, it was unknown. But what followed the fire made things even more chilling. As the snow melted weeks later, revealing the thawed ground beneath, skeletal remains were discovered in a half circle, near the fire site. Forensic analysis identified 3 of them: Thorne Vale, Juniper Redd, Silas Mirth. The 4th skeleton remained unidentified, but was missing several teeth and both hands. The 5th was never found. Authorities initially assumed the group had perished in the fire, perhaps a failed ritual, perhaps a final act of destruction. But that theory crumbled when a new child disappeared: 9-year-old Evan Marks, last seen playing in his backyard on the edge of the forest. No sign of struggle, no prints in the snow, just a single footprint, small and bare, leading into the woods before vanishing entirely. The town panicked. Was this Niah continuing the legacy alone? Or had someone else picked up where the others left off? Experts considered the terrifying idea that what began with 5 broken children had evolved into something larger, something that could survive beyond them. The symbols, the rituals, the recordings, they had all been preserved, passed on, taught. A disturbing pattern emerged, a string of seemingly unrelated deaths and disappearances across the state, all near wooded areas, all involving children. In each case, authorities discovered some remnant, an odd humming sound, heard by a witness, a crudely drawn symbol in the dirt, or a half-buried animal carcass surrounded by tiny stones. It wasn't just Callum Creek anymore. The sickness had spread. Criminal psychologists warned that the choir may have become more than a group. It may have become a belief system, a mythology passed among lost or damaged children looking for belonging, purpose, or power. The idea that trauma could bind them together in silence and secrecy terrified the world more than any singular killer could. The FBI issued a nationwide warning to schools, shelters, and foster homes. Watch for signs, strange drawings humming in groups, markings on the skin or walls, fascination with death or animal sacrifice. But the challenge remained. How do you stop a movement when its members hide in plain sight, when they don't speak, when they don't leave traces except for symbols and silence? Back in Callum Creek, the forest stands quiet. The wind rustles through the trees, brushing against the remnants of a forgotten place where children once disappeared. No one goes near the woods now. Even in daylight, something about them feels wrong, like a song waiting to begin again. And far from town, in a different county, a teacher finds a notebook left behind on a school desk. It's filled with drawings, trees, hollow-eyed figures, symbols like twisted music notes. On the last page, scrawled in red crayon, is a single word: rehearsal.